Welcome to the Virtuality Podcast. This is Craig Herndon with Jason Parks. Today we have Charity Everett, who is a creative voice in the emerging media industry. She's part of the original Oculus Launchpad and has recently completed 2 artist residencies, one in Cambridge and another in New York. She has spoken at GDC, AR in Action, and even in the Harvard ArtTechPsyche IV. I'm pleased to introduce Charity Everett. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you. Good to be here.
Thanks for joining us.
All right, Charity, so your most recent work that you've been on is Go Back Fetch It. But before we jump into that, why don't we kind of go back into how you got into AR? Would you consider yourself more originally an artist who is like super into tech? Or like how would you identify yourself in the creative sphere?
I didn't really think of myself as a technological person before I discovered VR and AR. I never really, thought that I would ever be coding or creating an app or, sitting down and doing the multitude of things that it takes in order to pull this off. I was thinking of myself as more like a filmmaker, storyteller. It's just that when I first experienced this, it just completely like blew the walls off my mind on the possibilities of the ways you could possibly tell a story. And it just went deeper and deeper and deeper from there.
At what point did you realize the new immersive media? And what would you say like your jump in point into it was?
Oh, I remember it like it was yesterday. I had actually just moved to the Boston area. It was the first month I was here. I went to a meetup that was for YouTube creators. And the person who was running the meetup, she had just started doing things with 360 video. So she, takes her phone, she sticks it in this cardboard thing, she hands it to me. I put it up to my face. I'm standing in her living room. And I'm just gone. All the possibilities in my mind started going crazy. I didn't sleep for a month. I just like completely got obsessed and completely like immersed myself with, like learning as much as I could about VR. And it was at a time when the everything was just starting to spring up. Like the scene, like the national scene was just starting to spring up, and a lot of things were happening on Facebook groups. And so I got in like the Facebook groups, and then I finally, after a few months of like tweeting about it and just like getting really excited about it, I finally felt comfortable enough to roll up my sleeves and to try to make my first experience, which I did. And I made it mainly 100% just so I could learn how to use the tools, like how to make with Unity 3D. And I made it based off of a friend's song. And it was this 360 musical experience where it was like this hyper trippy outer space, like crystalline world, and you're like floating through it, and you go through to
people
this,
are like dancing and
yeah,
like, people playing music and things like that going on.
Yeah,
I recall.
Super trippy. And like it was an obsession, actually. Like I worked on it through the night for 6 weeks. Like literally, like I could see as the sunrise was like changing. Like that's like, and yeah. And like, this is actually, I was still taking classes. And so like around midterm time, I like stopped and I counted the amount of time I'd spent on this project. And I was like, I've worked on this project for like 200 hours. This is crazy.
Was that the first time you had dived into a piece of art like that? Or before that, and in childhood, were you always vesting yourself and extremely interested in the projects that you found yourself doing?
Yeah, totally. I actually wrote my first script when I was in 3rd grade. I wrote my first feature-length movie script when I was 12, and I remember being completely obsessed with that for like 6 months. But I finished that project, and like I wasn't planning on doing anything with it. I was just like, okay, it's just something I did. And then that was right when they were like doing the first Oculus Launchpad program. And so I was like, well, you know what? I'll just, I'll send it in, whatever, nothing. And then like I found out that I got in, and then I was like flown out to Facebook. And like this was crazy because just 7 months prior to that, I didn't know anything about VR and AR. And then from there, I've just like, I worked for some startups. And I after leaving one, I decided that I was more of an artist and I wanted to kind of just like express myself through art. And I was more interested in making the switch from VR to AR because the other things I was doing was VR, because I was really big on accessibility. And I really wanted as many people as possible to be able to experience what it was that I was doing. So yeah, I made that switch to mobile-based AR.
Yeah, and I think specifying mobile-based AR is really important because we all have a phone in our pockets, and a majority of those phones are capable of witnessing augmented reality right now. I know an example that I heard you discuss on, I believe, the VR and AR in Action talk you had. And a point I bring up sometimes when I'm speaking is the 99 Crimes wine bottle, how you can actually, with your phone, be walking through a wine store, see a whole story of movement about one of the discussions on the bottle, which is sort of incredible. And it just shows that we all are able to access augmented reality right now. So that was a big driving factor for you, is that you just saw like where the adoption
why you
was?
chose more mobile AR over other options.
I want people to feel like that this technology is accessible, and not just accessible in the sense that something that they can do, but like accessible in something that they can, see themselves creating with as well. In order to do that, more people have to actually be exposed to it and see it as a possibility. And so that's the position that I'm coming from.
Interesting. How long do you see that being viable? We've seen a lot of AR headsets come out that are sort of in developer mode, looking for content to be made for it. Do you see a mobile-based augmented reality sticking around?
So it's definitely going to stick around. It's just that your mobile phone is going to migrate to your face, and that's what's going to happen. So like these headsets, like once they become less costly, they're just going to replace our phones. And then it's still going to be mobile-based AR. It's just going to be mobile headsets.
And with 5G, you're going to be able to have those assets and content be able to be accessible.
Yeah, it's slowly moving that way. Like North just came out with their like glasses, right? And then Huawei is announcing that they want to have a consumer-ready VR headset in the next 2 years. I'll say it when I believe it. And it's really until these devices can get in the hands of someone like Charity, they're really not going to have the content, or at least on that accessibility level, to make people feel they can go anywhere and be immersed in it. Like you need to be able to walk into a store and experience AR, or walk into an art show and experience AR. Because if I'm only experiencing it based on like a few apps that have been built, you're missing a lot of the potential that could make people feel like they want to be experiencing that. Like having a new thing on your head, especially if you're someone who doesn't wear glasses, could be very different. It's like, why would you do that to yourself unless there's a good enough benefit, unless you're like experiencing something that you feel like is a part of the human conversation?
And I feel like that brings up a great question. Ideally, do you see your content being widely spread across major cities, across the country, across the world? Do you see people, being able to walk up and right now we're looking at some of the content that Charity has already made, where
probably describe what the project
exactly.
is.
We're so close. You're
I
right about to get there.
Right. Yeah. I always take it back a bit. So my project is called Go Back Fetch It, the story of humanity. And it's an XR storytelling project about the history of the human race, told from the beginning leading up until now episodically. And so you're following this protagonist, this heroine. Her name is Eve, and she's going through all of these different phases along the story of human development, starting with when humans discovered how to make fire. In addition to this, I'm layering in interactive data visualizations, things like the Mercator projection, which, since I mentioned it, I'm just going to go ahead and say that because I think this is very important. If you picture the map of the world that you've always been taught, that is not an accurate representation of what the world looks like. It's based on something called the Mercator projection that they've been using since 1569. And they started using it because it made it easy to draw lines between shipping routes. But it really ended up drastically changing the way that we see the world, because it took everything that was on the equator and made it look smaller. And it took everything on the poles and made it look bigger. And so you end up with things like thinking that Greenland is the same size of Africa when Greenland is 14 times smaller than Africa. And if you actually look at it, the square miles of Africa is 80% of the square miles of the moon. So it's things like that, like human migratory patterns, just really like, we're playing with a lot of themes, right? Like just, I guess the main thing I'm doing is I'm using this new type of reality, extended reality, to punch holes in our consensus reality by like making us question lots of things, like question like, what is a protagonist? Like, why does it always have to be a hero's journey? Why can't it be a heroine's journey? Why can't it be Eve? Or like, like, who is Eve? Like, what would Eve have actually looked like based on like the scientific evidence we have? Like, if Eve would have been in Africa, or even like what does an XR experience have to look like? Does it all have to be like brightly colored, 3-dimensional, like poppy in your face? Like, why can't it be black and white? Why can't it be a shadow play? Why can't we like go back to the beginning of storytelling in order to birth storytelling in a new medium? And why can't we just like challenge all of these preconceived notions that we have as we're actually building what's going to be the next generation's lived reality, the actual world that they live their lives inside of? And so right now it's based off of physical pieces. I think it's really important to root the virtual digital experience in something that's really true and something that actually exists in the physical space, especially because I think it's really important that we continue to keep the humanity in technology. And another thing that I realized as I was mapping out like the different phases along the human story, like when humans discover how to make fire, and then when humans evolved to hunt, and then, the rise of agriculture, and then the rise of civilizations, I realized what I was really marking was the evolution of technology along with the evolution of the human race, and really demystifying technology in the sense that like it's not something that's outside of us that just a certain subsection of people do. It's something that all of us can do. It's something we've always done. Like it's the reason the human race has always evolved.
Mm-hmm.
So there are two things I want to get out of this next question. One would be the kinds of things that inspired you, but also a little bit of at what point did you pivot your story? Because if I recall correctly, the initial story you wanted to tell was your story, but I feel like there was a change somewhere in there where you realized that you were actually telling the human story and human experience.
Totally. Yeah. So this project, I started as a part of an artist in residency. And when I first pitched the project, what I really had in mind was the plan was I still wanted it to be mobile-based, image-based augmented reality, but I was going to get a tattoo on my stomach. And then when you scan the tattoo on my stomach, I was going to turn into a data visualization in the shape of a tree. And the different branches on the tree would be different data points. And then when I interacted with a piece of fruit from one of the data or from one of the branches of the tree, then it would turn into this parametric data visualization. And then it would turn into how this data point like impacted me as an individual. And the data points that I was planning on working with at the time were the global impacts of the African diaspora or the transatlantic slave trade. And as I started to do research and really think about the project, I realized that like every time anybody like talks about the continent of Africa, they always want to start the story there. But it's like that completely ignores like hundreds of thousands of years that happened before it. It ignores literally the entirety of the human race and like, oh, let's just talk about the last 500 years. And so I realized that it wouldn't really be fair to do that. And so then I decided if I was going to tell the story, I had to tell the story from the very beginning. And so if I were going to do that, it wasn't just my story I was telling, it was everyone's story. And then it got really depersonalized for me, and then like instead of it being like about me an individual, it's kind of like this mythologized character and Eve and her journey.
And here's the second part of that question. Was the pivoting point for you to realize that you could tell that story? Did you happen to see the 30,000 year history talk on VR by Russ Kant?
So I had seen that talk. That wasn't the pivoting point for me to try to tell it differently. I think he has a lot of good points in it, especially when he talks about the fact that people have been doing VR forever.
Exactly, and how like the images that are sort of drawn right next to each other when with flickering light actually creates a dimensional and somewhat of a primitive video.
And even has like the handprint of like what is a handprint, and you develop the first concept of the other. Or these realities that exist that don't exactly match the actual reality. So it like there's a lot of cool things in there, but for me, like when I like saw that, it definitely, because I actually saw it after I'd already known about your project. It reminded me of, I wonder if she pulled a few things from here.
I couldn't say specifically that I pulled from there. Let me talk more about what the project is called. The project is called Go Back Fetch It, and it's based off of this African Adinkra symbol from Ghana called the Sankofa, and it means we have to learn from the past before we can move into the future. And so like that started for me, like I thought that I was just talking about like, we're talking about human history. But then like that idea just kind of started recursing throughout the project. And I was like, well, really, if I stop and think about it and like we're talking about birthing storytelling in a new medium, then we should go back to the beginnings of storytelling in all mediums. And so that's why I chose to make it look like cave drawings. And there's even something about like almost like, like ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics about how they're presented. And like, that's why I chose to make it black and white. And that's why I chose to make it look like a shadow play. And that's why I chose to make it look super stylized. Like, George Millet and A Trip to the Moon is one of my inspirations as well. And
what part of that did you pull from? And then could you just, I know it's a really short video, could you just explain it just so listeners who aren't familiar with it can kind of know what's going on there?
The film?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So Trip to the Moon is a film by George Millet from 1912. He was this German magician who, when he first discovered like film, he got really, really inspired by the idea of being able to trick people. And so he came from this very theatrical, like stylized background. And so everything in it like looks like very, very, there's actually like this iconic image that like I'm going to describe it. And then you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about, but you're going to not realize that you even knew what this was. And it's this image of like this moon with a face on it. And then this big rocket ship comes and hits it in the eye. And like that is from that's a
classic.
The classic.
We've all seen it at some point.
Definitely. And you had no idea where it was from. Now you know. And so like if you can have that image in your mind, that's kind of what I was going for with the look of my project, where the world itself is made up out of these different symbols, but with that, when juxtaposed with like actual human beings, kind of gives it like this whimsical, otherworldly feel to it.
And you were recently invited to Sundance, and so let's talk to you a little bit more how you incorporated film into the AR experience, because like it's really cool that you're looking at this physical object and then you scan it, and now suddenly like people are actually moving around and dancing. So let's get into like a little bit of the mechanics about like how you made it happen.
Totally, yeah. So I used a unique process. So we filmed on a green screen. Then I took that, gave it the stylized look. I composited it together with different animated and designed elements. And I put that together to create the file that you're seeing played when you scan it. For the version that I'm submitting to Sundance, I was invited to apply. I'm adding in from AR to VR, which is why I'm calling the project more XR, where it's kind of like it turns into a portal that puts you into the world. And then the world that you're inside of is a cave. And then on the walls of the cave, you have these interactive data visualizations that you can like explore and learn more about that world and our world and reality and, you know, what we think about as reality and all these different things. So very, very, very much drawing from Plato's allegory of the cave as well.
Excellent. And for all our listeners, we will have links to all of these examples and more so that you'll be able to check out any of Charity's work.
Even more than that.
She's launching an Etsy store, correct?
Yeah. So these pieces that we're discussing here will actually be available for purchase. And I would very much enjoy it if you would support the project. And these are actually fine art, wood art pieces that you can have in your home. And they have their own intrinsic value because they look like art. And then it's like, oh, wait, but there's this secret thing. If you like pull out your phone and scan it, there's this whole magical world and story. And awesome. So yeah, please check it out. And my website is www.gobackfetchit.com. And I'm sure there's going to be a link as well. So yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll have that in the show notes, and I'm sure our listeners will check it out.
So is there anything that you're specifically looking for people to see or learn or feel when they experience some of the different supplements you have as well as the original experience?
Well, first and foremost, I want to capture people's imagination and sense of wonderment. And then I would like to just make people think about different things. This is one thing I found from showing this project to lots of different people from lots of different walks of life. Everybody finds like a different thing about it that is really intriguing to them. Somebody are really intriguing by the idea of using this for storytelling. Somebody are really intrigued by female protagonists. Making it black and white. Challenging preconceived notions. Using it for data visualization. Using it for education. Using it for art. Like there's something about it that everybody I talk to, I feel like everyone takes away something different. So I would just like for you to experience it and then let me know what you think about it, actually. And
that is the power of art. So what's your Twitter handle in case they want to let you know what they think about it?
So it's at charity ARTiste. That's ARTISTE. And you can also email me at charity@gobackfetchit.com. And again, I'm also Charity Everett if you want to find me anywhere else, like on Facebook or whatever.
Excellent. And, that leads back to my original question before we dived into what everything was. Ideally, we talked a little bit about this being in homes. People can buy this. It could be on their walls. They can share it as art in their home. Where else do you see this propping up and popping up? Do you see this in storefronts or on the street? Is this in businesses? What would you like to do with this?
Yeah, definitely. My ideal scenario would for this to be in everyone's home. And for this to actually be a way for people to interface with spatialized computing as a way to kind of learn more about different topics, but always rooting it in storytelling and art. So this is just the very beginning stages of something that I see that could be much, much greater and much larger, but at the same time is also rooted in, humanity and in the real world.
Yeah, I could definitely see, especially if you have it as a centerpiece, it becomes a very interesting talking point as people discuss either what they're taking away from it or, oh, I didn't even know about AR. You can do what with your phone? Or, of course, with the experience itself, again, like education, female protagonists, all these different things that people can take away from it. And that's why I think actually would be a really cool centerpiece to have in your living room, something like that.
And something that I think the three of us can also describe in detail that would be very helpful for our listeners is exactly how I would see this. A lot of people listening may not have even tried AR or VR, or if they have, they don't understand that there are apps on your phone that you can download, several different kinds, that allows you to witness the AR aspect of the art. So what are those apps or app that you use, and how exactly does that work?
So I'm going to be releasing an app that's going to be Go Back Fetch It on the App Store. But as of right now, if you were to get one of these pieces, if you just went to gobackfetchit.com/download, you can get the app there.
And that's free, of course, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So that's just something that comes along with buying a part of your art is an applicable app for it as well.
Of course.
Yeah. I've just noticed that a lot of individuals don't know that that's even a aspect. An example of that was Hub Week here in Boston. There were several different augmented reality exhibits around, and people were sitting, staring, and wondering how to access and work them. So I just know for those listeners who might not have tried, just look through the App Store, and there's a lot of examples of augmented reality.
So is there anything else that you would like to tell other aspiring artists or other developers or just creatives in general for if they wanted to do either something similar to you or maybe feel like they don't have the aptitude to do that kind of artwork and maybe they're just an artist who wants to get into tech, or maybe they're a tech person who's like, I don't really know how to art. What do you have any advice for them?
My advice would be to completely throw away the rule book. Don't worry if you feel like you don't know how to do something. Play to your strengths. And if you do that, you'll make something that is truly unique that nobody else could possibly make. And I wouldn't spend too much time looking at what a lot of the stuff that's already out there. Find your own voice, figure out what story you want to tell, and then run with that and tell it.
Let's see. Anything else we could discuss that maybe we didn't go over?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm launching an AR without coding, one-on-one coaching. So if you're an artist or somebody who's interested in getting involved with AR, you don't know how to code, but you'd like to kind of learn the process for figuring out your voice, figuring out how to tell a story, figuring out how to present, figuring out even how to use the tools. I just taught a workshop at it in Seattle last month. That's something I'm going to be offering. So if you're interested in that, please email me at charity@gobackfetchit.com. Again, that's CHARITY at gobackfetchit.com.
And like you mentioned earlier, you never imagined that you would be coding, and that now that you are, I would imagine that you realize that it's not so bad. I think a lot of people are a little hesitant to even start or try, but we all can do it.
Yeah, I think it's, to me, it was really important that I had a project in mind that I was already created, and I'd already created a part of it. And then it's okay, now that I've gone this far, so now it's not so scary. I'm not having to learn all these things. Now I'm just having to learn how to do this one thing, and then this one thing, and then this one thing, and this one thing, and then it all just kind of comes together and clicks.
One piece at a time.
Interesting. Yeah, having a reason to code.
I feel like in order to really get past anything that's a big hurdle for you, you really need to have something you're really passionate about that you're trying to do or implement as kind of the best way to jump in and learn something.
Excellent. So just keep a lookout on your blog, on your website to see what events and places you'll be speaking at.
Totally. Yeah, you should. And you should, sign up for my email list. If you go to gobackfetchit.com, definitely sign up for my email list, and I will keep you updated on everything that's going on.
Excellent. This has been another episode of the Virtuality Podcast. Charity, thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And it's been absolutely amazing chatting with you today.
We'll see you in this reality.
And the next. Thank you so much for listening. We would like to keep sharing more about VR and AR with you, so please consider a few dollars to our Patreon, linked in the show notes. The Virtuality Podcast is produced by Jason Parks and music by Rachel Dazinski. This podcast is in collaboration with Boston VR and Boston AR. Monthly meetups and events can be found on meetup.com. You can also follow us on Twitter @VirtualityCast and learn more at our website, virtuality.show.